here, I know my friend Devorah and Ruth, they're psychologists, but anybody else here is a therapist or works with trauma?
I've been to one.
That's relevant. I'm just curious, just in terms of language and, okay, great. So I wanted to just talk a little bit, just give a little framing around, what we mean when we talk about trauma, what we mean when we talk about personal trauma, what we mean when we talk about collective trauma, so that we have some shared language and I can, use that to reflect about the work. So one thing about trauma that is important is, there's a distinction, and this is coming from me, and I welcome any input from my trauma expert friends. There's a distinction between, let's say, tragedy and trauma, okay? So a tragedy is something that occurs, it's an event, it's something that happens. Trauma is the impact of something that happens inside of us. So when we are using this term trauma, right, we're talking about it's an impact. We're talking about what happens to us. And I think one of the things that's interesting about that is that, a tragedy has a certain kind of objectivity to it, right? It's an event you talk about, and we've all been bombarded with, tragic events that have happened. But how that impacts each person is very distinct, is very different, is very individual. So I think, when I'm looking at this show and I'm going to be using the term, trauma and personal trauma and collective trauma, it's really looking at how events have an impact within the human being. And how that's being reflected. So that was one thing I wanted to, give a little definition. And the other thing, which is a little bit more complex because it's more new in the field, is, what is the distinction when we talk about personal trauma and collective trauma, okay? And, personal trauma is obviously what happens within an individual person, okay? And so there's an event, there's a tragedy, there's an event, and then the impact that has in an individual person. And when we're using this term trauma, and I'll just say, something to sort of understand it from inside, a trauma is when an event that we're in, an experience that we're in, overwhelms the system, okay? Because we can go through a lot of difficult moments, a lot of difficult periods, but they come in, we experience them, and they move out, okay? A trauma is something that has a big enough impact that our system gets overwhelmed, and we need to do something inside to manage it, okay? We need to somehow handle it. We can't just move through it. And it is something that takes over our inner resources, and we become involved in it. So it's almost like, if you're looking at, an image of us moving through life, right? We move through life, we have ups and downs, but if a trauma comes and hits us, we start spinning. Something in us starts spinning. We can't just move on, okay? And we have to manage it. And, one of the things that we in the field look at are how we're managing our inner trauma, how we're managing this overwhelm that comes inside of us. What do we do? How do we cope? Okay, and I think this show touches on this a lot, and we'll get into the show. Now, collective trauma is more complex. It's a newer term, And I'll say how I understand it, and other people. But collective trauma is when there is an experience that is not just hitting an individual, but hits a group together. Okay, so obviously what we're going through now is a collective trauma. The Holocaust is like, a definition of a collective trauma. So you have something, huge thing that hits a large number of people together. Now what's significant about that is that then the trauma is not just located within the individual, but it's located between, okay? It's in the environment, it's in the space. Basically we are living in a field of collective trauma. And if you tune into that, you can feel it, you can feel that you're in, a space where there's a lot of heaviness. You can feel where they're in a space with a lot of fragility. You can feel, you're in a space that is holding a trauma, sort of in the not just the inner cells, but the cells between us. Okay, so I wanted to bring this out because I think one of the fascinating things about this exhibit is that it runs from the beginning, which was a personal trauma that Debbie experienced, and we'll say how she related to that, how that came out. And then, obviously this was not planned, but that opening met a collective trauma. And, one of the things that was fascinating is that it was almost like once that door was opened, in Debbie, once she was doing this work, once she was relating to, her own trauma, it was almost like there was no way that she could not sort of continue that into the collective trauma that occurred. And I think there's something very unique about that. I mean, obviously that's not something you can or would want to plan for, but I think it's very powerful to get the feeling of how personal trauma and collective trauma are woven into each other, are experienced, and are integral parts of each other. That's one of the things. Sometimes people look at it like these distinct things, but they're not. It's exactly like what occurred in her. There's a personal overwhelm, and then that meets something that's happening in the collective. Mm-hmm. So I found it fascinating, to look at the work through this screen, to see the elements that are expressing it and how it impacts us, within ourselves. So I thought to kind of break it down, into some of the topics, and I'll look at, we'll look at some of the work through that, and then, opening it up to, what you see and your reflections and how you experience it. So the first thing I'm going to take a lot of liberty. I'm just going to talk like, I'm not going to ask her permission. The first thing I want to talk about is observing the process of this work and the process of the artist in this work, okay? Because that was one of the really interesting things to me around this particular exhibit. I mean, I've known Debbie very, very well for 29 years, and I've seen her go through periods of creating work and creating exhibits. So it was very interesting to see, both what was similar, but more what was unique in this process. So the first thing about this process was, Debbie had not been really creating a lot of art for a while. I mean, and I think this was kind of typical, like, she'd have like a big sort of opening, a lot of creativity, a lot would come out, it would get focused, and then she would have periods where, it would be more quiet. So, she had not been creating work for a while, and really kind of very touchingly and I don't know, symbolically we could say, last year, January 21st, which is going to be Sunday, it's exactly a year ago, she got a terrible call. It was actually a Friday and morning that her nephew, Ben, the youngest son of her sister Beverly, was killed tragically in a plane accident. And Ben, was really a remarkable young man. I won't go into talking about him because I didn't know him well, but knew him from Debbie. But he was, as you can see from the depictions, he was a person with a huge life force and a big life. And it was sudden, and it was shocking, and it was tragic. And it was, I would say, for Debbie, it was like, I've never seen her respond. I mean, I've seen her go through a lot in her life. I've never seen her respond in that way before. She was really, I have to say, hysterical. And not able, as saying about the trauma, to just like have it be a something she went through and something that she, then could just easily move through. It really, in a way, broke her apart. And, one of the, I think, it's very interesting, this relationship between, let's say, the creative process and the emotional process, right? They're very intertwined. So from this kind of scream, I would say, for her particular, she needed to create something, okay? So one of the, I think, hallmarks of this exhibit is this kind of impetus, this kind of need to create, this huge reaction that, had to come out in the material, in the art, in the images, which is a very different process than one might say a reflective process, right? It's a different process than one is reflecting about aspects of their life, reflecting about their family, reflecting about, what's going on inside, which is, has more space, has more time. This work came out of like a very quick, reactive, expressive movement. And, I think the elements of the work express that, okay? So I can point to what I see about these, some of what I see in the work that is expressing, this kind of immediacy that, communicates to us. So one thing that's very interesting, I mean, that's very clear is the material that Debbie used, right? There's almost no canvas, okay, in this show. The material is all, it's glass, it's wax, it's ice, okay? The material is all material that expresses like fragility, that expresses something that can disintegrate, that expresses something that's temporary. And, I just, I think that's such a powerful part of the work, because you can feel in the pieces like, a shattering, like, in this piece over there, like, the use of that material really gives us a sense for me, I can say, people can, but it really gives a sense as I move through the exhibit of this kind of fragile life that can just kind of crack at any moment. And I don't think there's any canvas in the entire, it just, it's almost like she couldn't put this experience onto something that would be so solid, that would be so firm. And the other thing that's, I think, is very interesting use of material, and this is especially in the personal, because you can see it's like starts, it has a certain timeline. It sort of starts from a very personal experience, and all of this is, and I'll sort of hallmark it, but you see the event, there's Ben, there's pictures of Beverly, there's, I think the first piece, I'm going to stand up, the first piece she did was this piece, which is of herself. Okay, this piece here, it's a self-portrait. Okay, recognize this glass piece here, and then that's of Debbie herself. And then she started doing pictures of Ben and Beverly, and I think that's mostly, those are mostly the Beverly's, her sister. I think there's also might be her mother. So, you see the use of the material, and also it's very interesting, she used as the frames, she used door and window frames, okay? Most of it, not everyone, but most of it, which is also very interesting around what she wants to convey, because like a regular picture frame, right, is, we know those, you have a painting on the wall, it's like just one-dimensional. But when you look at a door frame, you look at a window frame, there are two sides, right? It's coming out and it's going in. And, I don't know how conscious all of this was. It was extremely instinctual, but I think it brings us into a world where we get a sense, there's like looking out at the world, there's how the world is hitting us, and then there's who we are inside. So this inner-outer piece, was very important in this personal framing. So, and then, you can see the material gets carried on, like, and I just think the material she chose is such a significant part of this exhibit, because in material, when you look at material, it doesn't just move into your, brain as an image. Oh, this is an image of something. But you actually feel it. You feel it viscerally. When we see glass, when we see light coming through glass, when we feel, we can almost feel the quality of glass viscerally. When we see wax and we see, wax dripping, and we can almost feel it in ourselves, this melting, this dissolving, this, so it gives a very visceral quality to what's being communicated. So yeah, okay. So the other thing that's really interesting, was very interesting to me in the exhibit is, so you have a personal experience, and the first piece is really like bringing, her pain and the impact on her as a self-portrait, and then needing to relate to Ben, needing to relate to, you see the picture of him with the sunglasses, how alive he is. And then there's the same picture that's behind the light where, he's not really here anymore. I you know, and then similarly with her sister Beverly, who is, you know, in pretty severe dementia. So, you know, there's a sense of this disintegration, this loss, that's going through the themes here. And then it's very interesting because it moves into, you know, this part where you have, these are Debbie's faces, you know, that are made into candles. Okay, the candle faces, and then, you know, these candles that are melting. And so it was very interesting. You have like a depiction of an event, a story, you know, and this is how we process, if we're looking about how we process what happens in our life. So, you know, you have the images, the initial relating to what happened, and then you have, you know, what it does to you. What happens to you, you know, where you go. So I think it is very interesting because, you know, you start to move from the story into, you know, the inner experience. And, you know, you're not really even sure what's happening here, but you get a feeling of this melting, this dissolving, you know, not quite here, and the very visceral quality of that. And then what's very interesting to me is this piece here. These were ice pieces, okay, that Debbie filmed. I really think this is one of the most powerful pieces because you have, you know, in a way it touches, you know, the existential nature of life, right? So you have, you know, what is formed, what is very formed, and then, you know, just this movement and this disintegration of life into its pieces. But something remains. You know, something is here. And I love this piece because I love the kind of both the abstract nature of it, but how it ties into everything that came before it. You know, and really brings you both, and it's interesting, both from the personal experience to the almost existential experience, right? Because we go through something very personally in life, but we're part of life. We're part of something much bigger. And there was something about this piece that moved beyond something very, very personal into something very universal, very existential. We don't need to know the story. We don't need to know exactly what happened. I think we can all relate to this as just an existential process that happens that we're all part of. And the weird thing to me, and this is, I felt this throughout like this whole process, is Debbie did this before October 7th, okay? So it has this, what's the word when you, foreshadowing. Okay, there's a certain quality, I think that is also something very powerful in this work, is this foreshadowing of something that was very personal, that is very existential, and that now we are all in. You know, it's part of all of us. So this is kind of the, I mean, I wasn't here, it's so interesting, I wasn't here when they put this together, when they, you know, they put, but it is what it, you know, it had to be this way, because, you know, this really brings us into moving into post-October 7th, okay? And similarly, you know, after October 7th, it wasn't a reflective, it was just like she had to start making wax soldiers. And it came similarly from a kind of need to respond to what had happened. And I think it's very interesting also, you know, when we think about the material that's being used, because for the soldiers, she made a wax, a wax mold, what?
It's a mold.
A mold, she made a mold, and then she poured the wax into it. And I think, there's a lot, there are candles, there are memorials, but there's also a certain density to this piece. And it's weird for me, I don't know how other people feel, but moving through this part, there's a kind of, you're looking at, material of glass and wax. It has I don't know, a kind of not solid feel to it.
Fragility.
But,
Fragility.
Fragility, yeah. But when you look at that piece, it's very grounded, by its nature. And, I think it both really touches people, but it also, kind of grounds us in what's happening, in a kind of weightedness, which is in contrast to the piece about the hostages, which it gives this incredibly precarious, somebody wrote they're hanging by a thread, this you can't, ground it in your body. So, I think, again, this kind of intuitive, instinctual response to what was happening, and kind of reaching for a material that is going to be able to, I think, both express what's happening, but also give a contact to it, a visceral contact to what's happening, was just, I don't know, it just was really interesting for me to really observe, these movements and then, how it transmitted, to the observer, right? I think if I had anything else I wanted to say, or didn't say. Deb, you chime in.
I think that if people want to have questions or respond.
Yeah. I think I will open it to comments or questions or, yeah. Yeah, say your name.
My name is Sam.
Yeah.
When we come to an exhibition like this, which will collective trauma, you describe that very well, and it's true. And we have to talk about two things. One is the artist, one is the artist,
Yeah.
and one is the product.
Yeah.
And another thing is the process. That's what we're dealing with, right? Now you've dealt with this. We can relate to art in many ways. We can relate to art aesthetically, psychologically, sociologically, and philosophically, right? Now you've chosen to relate to the art of Debbie through the psychological process in which we have gone through, and many of us have gone through a similar sociological process, which brings us to the point of what is the role of the artist in society, which brings us to the question of sociology. Now, Shelley once said that the artist is the legislator of mankind. And the point is, the role of the artist in society is that he can express things that we may not be able to express, because the artist has an intuition.
Yeah.
There's an intuition, but not only an intuition and a deep, often subconscious understanding of what is going on, but also the ability to express it in a way that will be universally comprehended, right?
Yeah.
So that
Exactly.
what I'd like to talk about is not what's happening to Debbie as a person, but what she has done in order to express these things as an artist. Now, what she has done very clearly, and I relate more than anything else to the use of the wax, and particularly to the beeswax, right, as a media, which is a fairly unusual sort of thing to do, but I think is extremely appropriate, right? and I mentioned it to Debbie before, and the first thing that she said to me was, "My name is Deborah," right? And Deborah is the bee, right? So he has chosen something, right? Not just wax, but she used just wax as well, but she's chosen beeswax,
Yeah.
right? Now, beeswax is peculiarly appropriate because it makes the relationship between the artist and the thing that the artist is trying to express, right? And one of the most important things, it's becoming difficult. One of the most important things that an artist has to do, in fact this is the artist's main role, is to communicate, right? He has to communicate between the personal understanding of the particular event, which in this case we all agree is tragic, which means we have to go into the question of what is the role of tragedy, but we're not going to do that. And to be able to communicate to somebody else so that it can satisfy that person's need to understand and the artist's need to express, right? And I'm sure that Debbie did all this because she couldn't do anything else. Right? This was I don't know, a command from whatever you want. She had to do this, right? And she had to do it in a way which meant something to her and meant something to everybody else as well. And the choice of beeswax, I think, satisfies this because beeswax is, first of all, it is temporary. The use of beeswax, the combination of beeswax and flame is what makes the beeswax gradually disappear, which is the ultimate, for Debbie, I think, symbol of life. When Aristotle talks about art being the imitation of life, in this particular talk, we're talking about not only life, we're talking about death. And the depiction of death through the use of beeswax and the flame, I think, is the heart of your artistic process, if I can say that. And I think it's received very well universally. I think all of us have looked at it and we've felt about the temporary nature of life, about the ending of life, about the fragility of life, and even about the ugliness of life. If you look in here, in this particular group of things, you will find that the wax spills onto the floor, which means we don't have any control. It can go anywhere. And not only that, but it is not artistic in the sense of beautiful. It is artistic in the sense of life is messy. We have no control, and often it's very ugly.
Yeah, Shelley.
I've been looking at these pieces also in pictures. I haven't had a chance here yet. I'm very moved and taken by the use of color. To me, especially these dangling glass pieces, bursts of emotion, anger, light, hope. I don't know. I'd like to hear what your choice of color was. It just instinctive, or
The entire show was instinctive. Nothing was really thought out. It just came through me. I don't even feel like it's mine. Yeah, that's how I
when you
feel.
started, it's like
Yeah,
splashes of light.
yeah. No, I knew I had that poppy that represents the hostages. Each one has a name and a photo of the hostage. This is after the first exchange, and they are dangling by a thread, and you can hear them screaming out or calling out, and you can hear their voices. So that's what that is for me.
Okay, I would just like to, when I look at glass, I really actually think of love from the beautiful colors. So, actually, I really appreciated that whole wax thing, because when I'm looking at everything, I remember when you started this, and I remember when you couldn't speak, and I remember when you kind of sent me the message, that his last message that he had sent. And this is like what you know how to do. Like you know, it was almost like a purging. Like you knew how to do this. You knew how to take the find the scraps, and you're so comfortable with the glass, and you knew how to, and you're a beautiful painter, and you knew how to start. And then it was just like Hillary says, it's almost like it wasn't, I mean, I don't know if it's a premonition or what it is, but it's life, unfortunately. And I do find the wax so profound at the end, and how you grounded it, even though it's so painful and it's so sad. You actually came through this whole cycle, and you've got the hostages like free floating, but still there's like, it gives me goosebumps to my legs, because it's like beauty and love, and we just are so hopeful. So that's it. It's beautiful.
Turns out they're not so fragile. Use it as
Yeah.
Slowly, hopefully.
Say that, first of all, it's beautiful. And thank you, Hillary, for your teamwork bringing us in. One of the thoughts that I had was something that I heard at a lecture in the first weeks of the war, had to do with the collective trauma. And that this idea that the wall that had been broken down between Gaza and Israel was similar to the wall that we have between the conscious and the unconscious. And something broke down and then came flooding out of our collective unconscious, all kinds of images from our collective historical traumas. You know, a lot of Holocaust imagery, and like these images are sort of flying all around and like sticking to our brain, and like that was sort of what I felt like when I saw this, like these particles that have to do with our collective, the trauma that we have as a people in our collective unconscious, and that like they're stuck, and like the use of the glass is really powerful, because on one hand it is beautiful and it has the sound, but like there's this feeling on a concrete level that the hostages are trapped inside this glass, in the same way that they're trapped in Gaza, they're trapped in the tunnels, and they're dangling, and they can break so easily, like that sense of that they can die at any time, as they have. And I also really related to what you said about the idea of the wax, that the wax, on one hand, it's like you're telling the story of death, like you're trying to commemorate these people who have died, but at the same time, because of the nature of wax, we know that these things are also going to disintegrate, and like when I saw this, I thought Holocaust for some reason. Like I thought, like, endless bodies, and so it's about the soldiers, but it's also, I think it's familiar to us because of the imagery that we carry from the Holocaust of like bodies and bodies and bodies. No, it's beautiful.
Can I just add something? I don't know if everybody noticed, but in the wax figures, everyone has a wig.
Right, it's like a big word.
And it's like it's saying that life is a terminal disease, that we carry within our lives the things that will bring us to our deaths. And I think this is an ongoing theme in this particular thing. You can have no life without the consciousness of death.
Yeah, I just want to say I really appreciated what you said about the role of the artist in society, because I think one of the things we're seeing is like there's so many layers to what is happening, to our experience, to the distinction between the conscious and the unconscious. So many layers. That's I think what creates part of the overwhelm. And I think one of the roles of the artist is, through art, you can convey so many layers, in a single, kind of room. It holds so much. And I think it is a way in society that these events of life get digested. you know, because it's able to be held and we're able to relate to it. So I really appreciated that. I think it's really true. Any other thoughts, questions, curiosities, comments? Marlies?
Comment. My fear, I come, I'm gonna cry. I come away with a lot of fear because I think it's always our responsibility to remember, to pass on. And the idea that dementia is such a real thing frightens me. On every level of this exhibit.
Yeah, that's
Sorry.
really interesting.
Just one thing to say. It is extremely refreshing, right, to come to this thing and all we're talking about is life and art and the psychology of pain without mentioning politics.
Beyond politics.
And I'm going to get a little personal about being married to the artist. So I wake up each morning. First, of course, I worry about our elderly dog. Seems to be not hearing well and not seeing well. And I have this tremendous pain in my chest that I recognize is indigestion from everything that's happening. But Debbie has often already checked the news, is outside. I'm never going to enjoy the smell of melting candles because she's making more candles for the people who just died that night and the day before. And that's kind of her compulsive process of how she deals with it all.
Yeah.
Just one thing, I think there's some hope because there's a flame, and a flame is an eternal flame, and I think maybe we should, that's the end word, because there is hope.
So what I'm going to do in a moment is unfortunately, there were three more soldiers that fell within the past couple of days. I'm going to add those figures to this installation here. And then I would like to say that if you would like to contribute, I am committed to continuing this installation, this process until the end of the war. Meaning Daniel's going to have to suffer every morning. I mean, God, maybe he won't have to. And the smell of the wax will end, and there will be no more deaths. But until that happens, I'm going to continue making these figures. And if you would like to contribute toward helping that, this project continue, there's a note up there, you could actually bid me. The wax turns out to be, it's expensive and I can handle it, but if you would like to be part of this project, you are welcome to. But in return, I would like you to take, Naomi, can you hold up their heart? Yeah, just hold up one, hold up one. It's the Shema Yisrael. It's white on white. You can't really see it here, but you can see it here. Take one in exchange. They're rubber bands. You can make a roll or take it home. Under good lighting, they can be seen. It was intentional, white on white, very subtle, but there. And we know that the soldiers use that Shema when they're going in, and it's very, very.
I want to add to that. Debbie had told me they're not manufactured. They're actually
They're hand silk
each
screened.
one is hand silk
Studio.
screened.
My hand, I made a lot.
Right, and so they are really subtle. I mean, to me, that really speaks to me, and I think it's a beautiful way to contribute. If you can, it's 180 shekels to contribute, and then you'll get one of these hand silk screened, and Debbie will sign it.
There's signs, but I'll send it. All right, so I'm going to add the soldiers now, and we can put the chairs toward the center, and feel free to walk around if you have any other questions. Hillary, thank you. It's really great to have a friend sister who gets you totally, because she said I'm better, because she's much better word. I'm better with art, she's better with words. So she said what I wouldn't be able to express in words. So thank you so much, really.
Debbie, don't you also want to see if anyone has?
Is there anybody who have any kind of ideas of how this could be continued, places of in the States or here, where there could be a future for,
I'd like to see this travel, and I
Right.
have some connections in the States that are, maybe the Jewish Museum in Washington DC, that they're maybe interested.
Oh.
I'd love to see the Soldiers Coalition travel, but I'm not sure how that would happen.
Yeah.
So, and, so, thank you. Thank you all.